He built the most magnificent palace in Europe. He ruled France for 72 years. But Louis XIV's greatest obsession wasn't power or glory. It was women. And the lengths he went to satisfy his appetites would shock even by today's standards. This is the story history class never taught you. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel where we dig into the darkest, most scandalous secrets of history. Today, we're talking about Louis XIV, the Sun King, who wasn't just the most powerful monarch in Europe, but possibly the most insatiable. We're talking double-digit mistresses, palace orgies barely disguised as parties, and a sex life so excessive that doctors had to perform surgery on him just to keep up with his activities. Hit that subscribe button, because this one's going to get wild. Louis XIV became king at age 4, but it wasn't until his 20s that his legendary appetite for women truly emerged. And here's the thing, this wasn't just about having a mistress or two on the side. Louis transformed adultery into a full-time career, a public spectacle, and essentially a job requirement at Versailles. Let's start with his marriage. In 1660, Louis married his cousin, Maria Theresa of Spain. Political marriage, standard stuff for royalty. But Louis didn't even pretend to be faithful. In fact, he was already sleeping with one of his brother's girlfriends before the wedding. Maria Theresa would spend the next 23 years watching her husband parade his mistresses in front of the entire court, while she remained virtually invisible. She reportedly said, "I am the only woman in France who never sees the king." Imagine that humiliation. But here's where it gets crazy. Louis didn't just have affairs, he institutionalized them. His mistresses weren't hidden away. They lived in the palace, attended state functions, and wielded real political power. They were essentially unofficial queens, often more visible and influential than the actual queen. Let's talk about Louise de la Vallière, his first official favorite mistress. She was 17 when she caught the king's eye in 1661, sweet, innocent, genuinely in love with him. For a while, she was the most powerful woman at court. She gave Louis 4 children. But here's the dark part. Louis didn't just have Louise. While she was pregnant with his children, he was already sleeping with her best friend. Enter Madame de Montespan, Louise's so-called friend, who became Louise's next obsession. Françoise Athénaïs de Montespan was everything Louise wasn't: ambitious, cunning, and absolutely ruthless. She deliberately seduced Louis while pretending to be Louise's confidant. And when Louis fell for her, Louise was forced to watch her best friend steal her position, her influence, and her lover. Louise eventually fled to a convent, spending the last 36 years of her life in penance, limping because of a permanent injury from childbirth. Meanwhile, Montespan moved into Louise's apartments, but Montespan's story gets even darker. She held Louis's attention for 13 years and gave him 7 children. But here's the scandalous part. She was married the entire time. Her husband was so outraged, he held a mock funeral for her, treating her as dead. Louis had him exiled to the countryside. The affair was so public, so flagrant, that even the Pope was sending angry letters. And the rumors about Montespan, absolutely wild. She was accused of being involved in the affair of the poisons, a massive scandal where members of the French aristocracy were allegedly using black magic, love potions, and actual poison to manipulate the court. Witnesses claimed Montespan attended black masses where a naked woman served as an altar, and prayers were said over her body to keep Louis obsessed with her. While the most extreme accusations were likely exaggerated, The fact that this was even plausible shows how twisted the court had become. Here's something that really shows Louis's character. He built an entire apartment complex at Versailles, specifically to house his illegitimate children. At one point, he had so many mistresses and their children living in the palace that it became a logistical nightmare. He legitimized most of his bastards, giving them noble titles, and married them into the highest families of France. His illegitimate children had better lives than most legitimate nobles. But wait, it gets weirder. Louis had a medical condition that made his sex life incredibly painful. In 1686, he underwent surgery without anesthesia, because it didn't exist yet, to remove a massive anal fistula. The procedure was so brutal that the surgeon practiced on dozens of prisoners first. Louis underwent the surgery while conscious, reportedly never crying out once. But here's the dark comedy. The operation was successful, and instead of slowing down, he became even more sexually active afterward. Court observers literally commented on it. As Louis aged, his taste changed in disturbing ways. In his 50s and 60s, he started pursuing younger and younger women. He had a relationship with the teenage daughter of one of his ministers. The power dynamic was so predatory that even by the loose standards of the French court, eyebrows were raised. Then came his final relationship with Madame de Maintenon, who had been the governess to his illegitimate children with Montespan. After Queen Maria Theresa finally died in 1683, Louis secretly married Maintenon. She was 3 years older than him, deeply religious, and supposedly reformed him. But even this relationship was weird. She complained in letters about the king's incessant sexual demands well into his 70s. She wrote about being summoned to his chambers multiple times a day and having to endure her duties even when ill. The real kicker: Louis probably died because of his sex life. In 1715, at age 76, he developed gangrene in his leg. Some historians believe it was related to syphilis or other sexually transmitted diseases he'd contracted over decades of unprotected sex with countless partners. He died an agonizing death, his leg literally rotting while he was still alive. Here's the body count. Louis XIV officially had at least 6 major mistresses. He fathered at least 16 illegitimate children that we know of, probably more. He was married twice. Dozens of other women passed through his bed in shorter affairs that history barely recorded. The man spent over 60 years in a nearly constant state of sexual activity with multiple partners, often simultaneously. The wildest part? This was all completely public. Everyone knew. The court operated around his affairs. Ministers timed their requests based on which mistress was in favor. Foreign ambassadors brought gifts for the mistresses. The entire machinery of French government bent around Louis's insatiable sexual appetite. So there you have it. The Sun King's secret was that he had no secrets. His sex life was the worst kept secret in Europe. A sprawling scandal that lasted over 6 decades and involved enough drama to fill 100 reality shows. History remembers him as Louis the Great, the embodiment of absolute monarchy. But maybe he should be remembered as Louis the Insatiable, a man whose appetites knew no bounds and whose power let him indulge every desire without consequence. What do you think? Was Louis XIV a product of his time, or just a guy who couldn't keep it in his pants? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this dive into the dark side of history, smash that like button and subscribe for more scandalous historical content. Trust me, there's plenty more where this came from. This is history's dark ledger. Subscribe for the stories history tried to bury.